Okay, folks, so today we have the 5 biggest mistakes that beginners make in jiu-jitsu. So when I say beginners, it could be people just thinking about doing jiu-jitsu, it could be white belts, even blue belts this applies to. So I'm going to tell you these mistakes and I'm going to give you the simple solution. So Dan, I've been teaching jiu-jitsu for 18 years. I've been training since 1999. So I think I have a good perspective. I've seen people's careers in jiu-jitsu, and I think these 5 mistakes, if people can avoid them, it's going to make their life so much better, going to make their jiu-jitsu career so much better. So I'm going to start by telling you a story that's going to illustrate the first big mistake. So back in 1999, I used to train with this guy named Ed Nopek. So we're both white belts. He was a little bit taller than me, bigger than me, a really strong, sort of sturdy guy, very competitive, really, really tough guy. And Ed would do this thing where if he was on the bottom of side control, he would reach over the top, grab the sort of the scruff of your neck, the back of your gi. Then he would grab your pant by your knee and he would just do this heroic bridge and take you over. And you thought you were on side control. And before you knew it, you were on the bottom of side control. And this is like Ed's big thing. It was unbelievable. He was unstoppable until one day he went to do that and his pectoral muscle ripped off the bone. And that's where he got the name Ed Nopek because he was missing an actual pec muscle.
I thought his name was Ed Nopek.
Well, that's what we called him after this injury. I don't want to say his name because he's a nice guy and he's good at jiu-jitsu and good. He was just like one of those ferocious guys, but he had to get surgery to reattach his pec to his humerus bone, I think. So my point of the story is you should not be doing that. Don't be doing these heroic bridges. I have another story where my landlord actually came to my academy and he was like, "This looks great." He did a class with us. He's training. He's like, "This is," in the middle of the class. He comes over. He goes, "This is awesome." He goes, "I'm going to sign up immediately at the end of this class." Right at the end of the class, I hear him go, "Up!" And he didn't do the Ed Nopek thing, but he did one of these bridges. And what the injury is, like most people don't tear their pec off their shoulder. I just use that story because it's so illustrative of what damage can happen. But a lot of people, they damage that tissue in between their ribs, the cartilage there or the muscle, whatever it is there. And so it happens 2 different ways. They either bridge sharply and then twist their body. So then they take their whole system, they put it under tremendous stress, and something tears in there, like some of the cartilage or some of the muscle, and it's very painful. And then they can't continue to train. They need to take either a week, 2 weeks. I have seen people take as much as 6 months off and come back and continue. But those are the rare people. My landlord, one day of jiu-jitsu, done. He's never going to do it again, ever. And it's awful because if he had not done that, he could be training today and enjoying it and getting all the benefits of it. So, like that. So the other way you can get that injury, Dan, is if you're in your guard and somebody starts bending you in half. So you're not bridging, you're bending your torso and your spine the other way and get a little twisting, and then the ribs will rub over each other, and then you can get a similar injury.
So how does that happen if someone's passing and you're folded?
Yeah, they're coming under your legs and they're bending you in half, and you try to resist. You can tear some muscle in there. What's interesting about it is I found that people who are naturally powerful and strong, they're more likely to do that. Like the guys who are just like jellyfish, that they don't have a lot of natural strength, they tend not to do it. So it's actually more dangerous for the strong athletic guys. And
does that mean if that's happened to me,
you're strong and athletic?
Yeah, exactly. So I could take that's like a compliment.
Let me ask you. So you're a long-time purple belt, been training for a long time. Did you ever get this injury that I'm talking about?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah. At least once.
Do you remember the circumstance?
Yeah. The latter way you said, not someone's in side control, very heavy.
Yeah.
Kind of guy who had that game that was kind of heavy and brutal.
Yeah.
And I did a strong bridge and twisted. And I felt starting at the top, going downward. I felt pop, 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 like in a row
Oh man,
down my ribs.
not good.
And it really hurt. And I was out for a while.
Bummer.
Yeah. I've also hurt my ribs another way, probably less common, where I actually, a much bigger guy that I was rolling with when I first started, and I landed my ribs on his knee somehow. Like I was twisting and it just hit his knee. And I was so early in my training that it really, really hurt. And I did the reflex of like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." I think I said more like,
Yeah, perfectly fine.
And I roll where I never ever would roll like that now. I don't think any sane person would, but back then it was a little different too. It was like, no, there wasn't such a norm. There weren't norms even, I think, almost. So it was like, I didn't know what norms were. So I was like, I don't want to be the guy who says I'm hurt.
Oh, right. And I was a moron when I was a white belt. I had somebody doing a paintbrush technique to me. I just fully resisted, and my elbow went pop, pop, pop like 3 times. And then, my elbow was basically in pain for 12 months. Yeah. So here's the solution, Dan, to that. Here's what I would suggest to white belts and even blue belts.
Can I make a quick addition before not to interrupt you? But you could be even higher belt and make some of these mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you have a lot of really good videos online about, mistakes some beginners make.
Yeah.
And they're always like, I always feel like a little awkward as I'm like, I make that mistake. Or at least I sit there going, do I I'm not always positive, but I'll be like, do I do that?
Well, they're actually common.
Beginners.
They're common mistakes. We're calling it a beginner, but it's just like a typical mistake. So yeah.
But you can keep listening if you're even a more advanced belt, because you might.
Totally, yeah.
I think advanced belts make beginner mistakes.
They can. Definitely.
They can.
Yeah. Well, the other idea is if you can keep correcting these so-called beginner mistakes, you just get better and better. Yeah. It's the easiest way to get better, fix these mistakes. So what I would recommend, the solution to the white belts and the blue belts is, I know when you go into class, Dan, one of the first things they teach you, somebody's mounted on you, you somehow trap their arm, either pin it to your chest or you overhook, and you bridge the roll. That's great. Drill that in practice all the time. But when you're actually on the bottom of somebody, don't do that. Like just bridge with one leg. So in other words, try to do your elbow knee escape. So if I'm in the bottom of side control and I'm a white belt and blue belt, I'm not going to try to bridge you over to the other side. I'm just going to try to get my guard back. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is you're going to avoid this injury if you're not trying to bridge people over. And the other thing is, at the highest levels, it's very hard to bridge somebody over. It just doesn't really work. Like it works when the guy on top is making a mistake. So I think you really want to learn jiu-jitsu that's going to work against skilled people, not stuff that only works against unskilled people. So like for your white belt and maybe blue belt, do yourself a favor. Don't do any of these heroic bridges. Like if you bridge with one leg, you can off balance your opponent a little bit, but you can't hurt yourself. Like you can't generate enough force to hurt your ribs. So just bridge in one leg, just do like an elbow knee escape from wherever. If you master elbow knee escape, that's pretty good, man. That's where you want to be. That's the most efficient thing that you could do. So I think that's the solution to injuring yourself. Stop bridging with both legs. Stop doing these heroic bridges. Do a one-legged bridge, off balance your opponent, and try to get your guard back.
Yeah. And I think we've also established that if you have hurt your ribs, you're probably pretty strong and athletic. Is that what
exactly?
You're saying
Yeah. But what you're risking is ending your jiu-jitsu career on day one.
Yeah. For those who haven't blown ribs out, you can't roll pretty much.
No,
like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was able to, for the rest of that session, because of adrenaline, and then I was out.
Yeah.
After that, because it's impossible. Sometimes people don't understand impossible to roll injuries.
Yep.
They're like, you can roll with a bad back, or you can roll. And it's like, no, if your ribs are popped, you're not going to be able to roll. You're not going to be able to train.
Okay, Dan. Now, my second biggest mistake is chasing flashy submissions. So this changes over time. So I think the flashiest submission right now is buggy choke. And a lot of guys are good at it. So I don't know if you know what this one is, Dan. They're like on the bottom of side control, and they somehow reach over your head and connect their legs and arm together, and they could choke people out. The Rotula brothers are really good at it. But back in the day, oddly enough, I think rubber guard was a big thing. So I can remember guys like, I'm talking 15 years ago would say, "Oh, I know you don't like rubber guard." I go, "I didn't say I didn't like rubber guard. It's awesome. Eddie Bravo was amazing, but you can't just get the book. Like you got to learn the technique. You got to come in and train and figure it out. Um, but that stuff is always more interesting than the basic stuff. If I would suggest to people, if you're going to learn one technique as a white belt, or I would say as a white belt, you should try to master the rear naked choke because that is what is always going to be with you all the way to black belt. So, and in the UFC at the highest levels, probably the most common submission is rear naked choke. So why wouldn't you start trying to master that from day one?
I was just talking to someone about the UFC now and how it's harder and harder to submit people compared to the old days.
Oh, right.
And because everyone's trained, everyone's, athletic and trained in jiu-jitsu. And the enduring submission is the rear naked choke, right?
Yeah.
Like that one's still getting harder and harder to triangle people, harder and harder to leg locks are hard, even though they're doing well in jiu-jitsu tournaments. But like rear naked choke is always there.
Yeah, it's the king. And I think some beginners don't respect it enough that there's still a lot of detail involved in that. Like there's better ways to do it. You're not just simply squeezing their neck. So yeah, I had one of my white belts. He goes, "What should I be trying to figure?" I go, "Get on their back and do a rear naked choke. If you can do that, you can beat almost anybody, right?" And if you're good at what I also found, Dan, is so there's a woman who wrote a book. What is her name? Karen Pryor. You're a dog guy. So she wrote this book, Don't Shoot the Dog. Have you heard of this book?
No.
You know what's weird? She's from this area. She's from New England. So she was an animal trainer. She trained all kinds of animals. She trained like sea animals. So she worked for one of those like Sea World or something. So for a brief period of time, a long time ago, and she trained seals. And what they found is if she found a seal, you know how these things can do, these animals are amazing. They can like climb a ladder, go through a tunnel. They can do all this stuff. But the way they train them is they get them to touch their nose to like a bullseye and they give them a fish. So once the animal knows, oh, if I put my nose on that bullseye, I'm going to get a fish. Then they put the bullseye up a couple stairs and the seal goes up. Then they put the bullseye up an 18-foot ladder and the seal just puts his nose on the ladder. So my point is, if you're confident that you can finish a rear naked choke, you're going to find a lot of ways to get there. You're going to figure that part out because you're going to be so motivated. You're going to go, once I get there, I know I'm going to finish this guy. So,
right, and that's why you've been giving fish in your gym to
my
people
students
that get the rear naked choke.
Oddly enough,
slide it into their mouth.
Oddly enough, it's not that effective with humans. Yeah, I don't know what I got to give them. Yeah,
but to your point, people also think. I think there's sort of like you just get a rear naked choke or you don't. And there's a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to choke. It's hard to choke me if you're on my back, and I see people sometimes like on my back and I'm squirming around and they're like, oh, this was pointless. I couldn't get the choke. Or I even locked in a choke, but then he peeled my hand off. But if you're on my back, you're going to choke me. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of, they lose track of there's always more technique.
Well, that's funny.
And if they couldn't get it, it was a lack of technique. It was not because, oh, that doesn't work. I can't choke them.
You know what's funny? The same Ed Nopek, way back in like probably 2000, we were in the academy one day and I said, "Hey, Ed, do you ever rear naked choke anybody?" He goes, "No, I never get on anybody's back." "Do you?" I go, "No, never got on their back." And we thought it for a minute. We go, "Hey, let's do this. Why don't we start on each other's back and train live from there?" So like basically, like a couple of dummies, we stumbled upon positional training. So we started doing that training. And then, 3 weeks later, now I'm rear naked choking people in free rolls. Like we figured it out. It's very unsophisticated, but that's the power of that positional training. Like you have to like put yourself there so you can start to figure things out. So a beginner, I would say, don't chase flashy submissions. master the rear naked choke. Now, I'm going to add to this. This is controversial. Tell me what you think. At the highest levels, the most common submissions are rear naked choke. What do you think the second most, or right up there, tied like 1 and 2? Might be second.
Armbar.
Heel hook.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, especially no gi. Like in the gi, you can't heel hook, but in no gi, it's heel hook. So maybe, I don't do this, but maybe you might think, oh, if you're a beginner, learn how to rear naked choke and learn how to heel hook. That might be the most effective way to develop yourself. Like we don't specifically do that in our academy, but we have one guy, Henry, who's a really great competitor, Henry Oberlander, and he wrestled for a while in college. So when he came in, he already had some grappling skills. But the thing he did is he just liked to submit people. So he focused less on escaping and defending and more on submitting people. And he was like very quickly heel hooking people and rear naked choking people. So that might be the next paradigm that comes out. It's like, here's the first 2 things you learn: rear naked choke and heel hook.
Right.
Which is crazy, right?
Which is funny because I think what you always used to learn is focus on your escapes and your defense.
Oh, right.
And do not learn heel hooks because white belts can't use them in
Right.
tournaments and blah, blah, blah. But these things evolve. You know what I mean? So I'm
Right.
sure there's someone listening that's saying, you're saying exactly the wrong thing. Right? There's someone listening going,
Sure, there's a lot of people.
well, there's always someone that thinks
Yeah.
that. This one in particular that is like, no, white belts should not be heel hooking because it can damage the knee, as if you didn't know that.
Right.
And you should learn to defend and blah, blah, blah.
They might be right. I mean, that's it. That's pretty sound advice. Learn how to defend in bad positions and how to escape, because if you learn that, you're learning the inverse at the same time. You're learning how to control people because you understand the position, you know?
But it's a little limiting in that there's plenty of time to focus on your defense and rear naked choking someone, right? Like,
Well, that's what,
like
that's what
Jim
this,
going, I can't learn the rear naked
Right.
choke. I'm only learning my defense. Like,
that's
no,
what this guy Henry did. He's so dangerous, Dan. If you roll with him, he starts grabbing your neck in a guillotine. You pop your head out. He starts grabbing your heel. Then he grabs a kimura, and he became immediately super effective. And then when we would do positional training, I just pointed out some things. Well, here's what you want to think about when you're escaping. And that came second for him, but that worked for him. But he's the only one that I've seen learn that way. But, you know, I think a lot of this stuff depends on the individual and their personality. Like, you also have to value what excites somebody. If they get really excited about submitting people, that might be the better way to go, you know?
Right. And it's obvious, I think goes without saying, with the heel hook is not ripping people's knees up. I don't think. I think it
right.
goes without
Right.
saying that.
Yeah.
Learn to get into position. And,
Yeah, you got to teach
do
your students.
positional training.
Yeah, what you need to do, Dan, is teach them when they're in danger, when they're like, yeah, right here, you really don't have a realistic chance of escaping, so you should tap. And a lot of the injuries come from when a student's getting their knee reaped and they don't understand what knee reaping is. So, like, I've seen some guys, they do like a double ankle sweep and they come up and the bottom player reaps their knee and they don't understand that their knee is reaped. It's not even a leg lock and they hurt their knee. So if we can teach them early enough, like when their knee is in jeopardy, that's probably the way to go.
A mindset I've used, and not everyone's going to want to use this. This has to do more with casual training. I'm not training for competition or really getting sharp, but it's that certain bad positions, I'll feel like I've lost this role. Like I lost the role. I gave up. They've got me in a heel hook. It's real tight. I'm going to tap because I'm caught.
Yeah.
Like I'm good. And I know some people aren't going to want to do that, but a lot of people will be fine with it, I think. You know what I mean? Like, just be like, I'm lost. Like, I could picture even like someone could be on my back, rear naked choking me, and I'll feel like they can't finish it, but I messed up. Like, I messed up. They've completely locked in a rear naked choke. Maybe they can't squeeze tight enough, for example, for me to tap. But I'm going to treat it as, especially if I don't want to train my escape, I'll feel like, look, you got me. I
think, Dan, you bring up a good point. It comes back to, what is your purpose of training?
Right.
Is it skill development? So if you're trying to develop your skill and a guy's on your back squeezing your head for 20 minutes, you're probably not learning anything. So you might be better off tapping and moving on. You might tell the guy, I really wasn't getting strangled, but my jaw was hurt, so I just tapped.
Yeah.
Not to cop
Yeah,
out,
not
but
trying-
just to give them good
A
information.
good example is guillotine too, where I used to sit forever in a guillotine, and just sort of get my butt in the air and just sort of like it's not really that tight. And now sometimes it just kind of hurts, and I'm like, this was stupid. I got caught. Now I'm trying to train something else. Like maybe I'm trying to train guard passing.
Yeah.
And they caught me in a guillotine.
So you might as well
and then I'm stuck there a few minutes, and I'm like, I just don't want to train this right now.
Yeah, you're wasting time.
Yeah, I don't want to train guillotine escapes right now.
It's funny. You used to do this triangle escape where you would pull the knee down to the side. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Do you know that's one of two escapes that Gordon Ryan says are the only things worth doing?
Oh, good. Because I do that. And
Dan, you used to do that 10 years ago.
Yeah,
so I think you literally did it before Gordon did it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think before he started jiu-jitsu. Maybe he learned it from me. I don't know. It's possible. Could he have been passing through Massachusetts? But yeah, I did used to do that.
Yeah.
But I thought when you started saying that, I thought you were going to be like, it turns out it is the dumbest. So you started talking. You could rewind the tape to see me going, my expression as I'm like, oh, what?
Turns out it's one of the two things you should do, according to Gordon Ryan. That's pretty amazing.
What's the other thing?
When you kind of sit down and put your feet over their torso.
Right.
Yeah. They're pretty good. Those are pretty effective. Okay, Dan, now the third biggest mistake beginners make when they're learning and training jiu-jitsu is they do too much free rolling. So that's all we did back in the day. You would practice a couple techniques, then you'd partner up.
Well, it's fun.
Slap hands and you try to murder each other. And it's fun. Yeah, definitely. But it's suboptimal learning because you're just all over the place. Like you don't get to visit positions often enough to make any distinctions in what you're doing. And it just makes the learning so much more slow than what it could be if you did positional training, And the other thing is you can learn bad habits. So this is what I see a lot where you have two white belts going against each other. You could do something that works, quote unquote works, but it's actually not good technique and it's not going to work at blue belt or purple and above. And then your nervous system just gets that ingrained in them and they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then you have to unlearn it. And I've noticed with some students, it's actually harder to unlearn stuff.
My entire nervous system now is on unhealthy jiu-jitsu habits. Like it's all like burned.
Your whole game.
Burned. Yeah, it's my entire. They're burned like deep. If you could do an MRI, it's like deep crevices in my brain of the wrong jiu-jitsu moves. I think they're burned.
They have layers and layers of myelin sheathing around the wrong
they're
shit.
Like thick. Yeah, like they all like shine on an MRI, like bad jiu-jitsu. Someone could read out like during an MRI, like think of this wrong jiu-jitsu move. My brain would light up. So I'm with you. One thing about like we've talked about this before. Of course, everyone's going to want a free roll, and you can have plenty of it anyway. But I've talked about it before, where this saying, which you hear all the time, which is true, so don't get mad if you're someone that says it, which is mat time, don't lie. Mm-hmm. Which is true because you need to put in tons of time on the mat. But sometimes people take it slightly the wrong way, right? Which is that's what you need. Like, it's like all you need is a lot of mat time.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? They're like, just time on the mat and you'll get better. And it's not, that is the way I always understood it. And it's not quite right. Right? It's like, you can't just keep rolling and rolling and not do positional training and not be instructed and not fix your errors.
The rolling is experimental time, but if you don't have any controls in your experiments, it's hard to learn things effectively. And if you're just wandering in the woods trying to get someplace, you might find your way, but so much better if you're giving a general map and a compass and you can start to figure out the right direction to go. So, yeah.
Do you think it's fair to say it's like any sport? Like it's not, people would rather play baseball than batting practice. Yeah. So you need to, or fielding grounders, but you need to do it. Or like people would rather play basketball than shooting free throws. But you need to do sort of grind.
Well, the real greats, they say that in basketball particularly, they really put in the work of practicing certain shots and, significant volume of them. Yeah.
It's not as fun, right? No one wants to go out and shoot 100 free throws in a row.
But. No. So the simple solution is positional training. So if I was a white belt, one way to do it is, what if you just showed up and you did only mount and back control? So let's say you had 30 minutes to do training, or 20 minutes. 10 minutes of it was, this guy's going to start mounting at me. I'm going to try to escape, elbow knee escape particularly. And then I'm going to, if I get out, I'll go on top and I'll try to stay on top and maybe finish the guy. And then we'll do 10 minutes of back control. I think that would probably be an effective way to start as a white belt. Because if you're effective in those positions, that's not bad, right?
Yeah. Because even though there's infinite sort of positions in jiu-jitsu,
yeah,
not that many, like in the broadest sense. Like if
right.
you're like, I'm pretty good, comfortable with my back control, my mount, then you go to side control,
right?
Then you're starting to cover the bases,
I think so. And if you know how to get out of mount, if you're in side control, you can just let the guy mount you, I suppose, and then get out. So do more positional training, a little bit less free rolling. I know it's fun, but if you really want to develop faster, positional training is key. So the fourth mistake I see a lot of beginners make is, so Dan, I used to have this T-shirt, and on the back of it said, "Here to improve, not to prove." And that basically summarizes the fourth mistake, where a lot of guys think that they should know how to fight, or they should know how to do jujitsu, and they come to class and they want to demonstrate to the teacher, "See, I already know what I'm doing." And that desire to prove to the teacher that they already know what they're doing gets in the way of them actually learning and taking in new information. And so it ends up that I really think skill development should be your primary goal as a jiu-jitsu student. So if my primary goal is to show to you, hey, I really know what I'm doing, then skill development is a number one. So I'm not going to develop
an offshoot of I know what I'm doing is, look how good I am.
Yeah.
In general, like, look, I can get the better of
this.
Oh, right. I can beat these other people, or all those things that start going through your head.
That's hard, right?
Is it fair to say, I almost think one of the central philosophical approaches to jiu-jitsu that I've come to understand from you over years comes down to this. Like, just come and try to learn jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And do not worry about all the other things you might hear. Like, do I look good? Am I improving? When's my next belt?
Am I better than Dave?
Yeah. Whatever. That's a big one too, right? Yeah. Like, how good am I doing? Does John think I suck? Does John think I'm good? Like, just don't, come. It doesn't matter. Like, just come learn.
And Dan, isn't it vis-a-vis another person? It's like, people don't really look at their progress in the abstract. They always look at it as like, well, I used to be able to beat him. Now he's beating me. Like, it's always versus somebody else, which is like probably not helpful, but very typical.
I read a thing too that was like, so this is common now. It's not like from the old days where it'd be like, what should a blue belt be able to do?
Oh, interesting.
It's like a blue belt should be able to, if a guy comes in off the street that's twice your size, you should be able to easily beat him. And a purple belt should be able to relax and beat him within 1 minute. And these are, to me, it's all of a piece of like, why are you worrying about these things? Like, just, you know what I mean? Like, just learn jiu-jitsu.
Well, that's funny now. So I've been doing this like 25 years now. And a common thing where people would be like, what's more realistic, gi or no gi? And I don't think it's a useful question to ask, right? Because what are you even talking about? Like, oh, if somebody jumps on my back when I'm walking down the street, what's more realistic? Well, if I'm wearing a t-shirt and shorts and he jumps on my back, then probably no gi is more quote unquote realistic. If I'm wearing jeans and a jacket, then maybe a gi is more realistic, but I don't want anybody jumping on my back, and I don't want to be fighting anybody in the street either, I want to, God forbid if somebody attacks me, I'll defend myself. But so I think some of that stuff is a distraction.
It feels like there's a million ways to worry about your progress. Do you know what I mean? There's a million ways to be like, to be, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, instead of just come in and learn. And I'm not immune to it either. So it's easier said than done. I'm not saying like, it's not something you just say, look, just worry about jiu-jitsu and it's done. I think it's something you have to work on, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like it's something you have to always remind
Dan,
yourself.
I have to work on.
Saying it once is not going to get it done.
I agree. I work on it every day. It's amazing. It's like it's a struggle every day to be focused and focusing on the proper things, and not worrying about quote unquote losing and training, and just trying to be a good coach and be a good student and trying to develop. Here's one suggestion I would give people that I just noticed in the last couple of years, Dan. If you're a student, white belt or blue belt, especially a beginner, when the teacher is presenting some information, try to do it exactly, precisely like they're doing it, not sort of like they're doing it, right? So that sounds picayune, but when I've noticed all the classes I teach, there's some people that try to do it exactly the way we're doing it. And sometimes it's difficult because it's relatively complex thing that we're showing. Those students over the long term do better. They're not like filtering it out. They're really opening themselves up. They're trying to get, so every detail I present. So if you present a technique, a sweep or something, Dan, you may say, here's the 8 steps involved. But there's theoretically 800 little nuances in there. But you can only present so many points at a time in like a 3-minute presentation. And as a student, the more of those you can incorporate to what you're doing, the better you're going to be, because each one of those details represents a unit of leverage. So, you might sweep the guy without doing all 8 things, but man, if you do all 8 things, you have a much better chance. I even notice it in the warm up. So we do a very simple warm up at our academy, probably about 8 minutes long. It's not that complicated. We're not running around the mat for 25 minutes and jumping jacks or anything, but we feel they're important. And I notice the students that don't do the warm up movements precisely, they end up not developing as quickly because they're training their mind not to replicate the movements they're seeing, not to mimic them. I would like really try to mimic them. It's definitely going to help you improve faster. Now, all right, so now we're down to the 5th biggest mistake, the last one.
Why don't you review what the other ones were?
All right, let's do that. Good idea, Dan. So the first one was injuring yourself. I mean, that's bananas if you think about it. The only thing worse than injuring yourself in jiu-jitsu is injuring yourself doing strength and conditioning, right? That's the worst. It's deadlifting, I threw my back out. You probably would have been better off if you never deadlifted in your life, if you're going to like throw yourself out for a month.
And I think it's fair. You've done this for a while. It's not even a number. I think it's like a percentage of beginners that stop because they've hurt themselves.
It ends their career.
But it's not like 2 guys that happened to, right?
No.
It's like a lot. I know.
I've seen it time and again.
Stories,
yeah, it's a bummer.
And sometimes it's even been like 2 brothers started, one got hurt in the first 2 weeks, and then the other one's a black belt because he didn't get hurt.
Yeah,
right. That's a literal story, we know, right? Like
I think so. And I'm not saying like, oh, you're never going to get hurt. Yeah, you're always going to tweak yourself. It's a combat sport. It's challenging, but try not to do that heroic bridge for a couple of years. Just give yourself the chance. If you get a couple of years under your belt, then you know how your body should move. Like you can protect yourself better. You're more vulnerable in the very beginning when you don't really know the limits of your body and the position. So
at the broadest level, isn't it true to like one thing everyone that does jiu-jitsu says about beginners is that they need to relax, right? Like it's like they're just always that energy of like this like tense muscle. Like everyone knows that's what beginners do. So the faster you can stop doing that, is that fair to say?
100%.
The better, like, and the less likely, just relax. Like,
and oddly enough, the really strong guys have the biggest problem with that because they're so strong, they can like stalemate positions with their strength, but they're not developing. Dan, I'm still working on that today, 25 years in. So that's huge. So the number 2 mistake was chasing flashy submissions. In the beginning, stick with your rear naked choke, your positional training, maybe a triangle choke from your guard, or who knows, go crazy and learn how to heel hook people. Who knows? Number 3 was do less free rolling, do more positional training. I would say specifically the mount and back control. And number 4 was about coming to class with skill development as your priority, not to win or to prove something to yourself or prove something to other people. Just come in and try to get better. Okay, now we're at the number 5 biggest mistake beginners might make. And I'll bet you're going to be surprised when I tell you this, because I've only come up with this the last couple of years. It occurred to me. I was watching our white belts, and I watched some develop faster than others. And I'm like, what's the difference? Well, there's a lot of factors. Some people are just more naturally athletic, or some people already have some grappling experience in wrestling or judo or something. But I sort of discerned something else was going on there. And what it was is, I think you want to improvise less in the beginning. Like when these white belts improvise too much, what can happen is, out of 100 things, so you're training and you meet some resistance, so you try something. The problem is, as a white belt, probably 99 times out of 100, whatever you try on the fly is probably wrong. It's probably not going to serve you going forward. So all that improvisation is going to probably teach you bad habits. Like I see guys who are pretty good, like they actually get to blue belt and they'll be doing some fundamental mistake. Like they're in the bottom of half guard and they just put both feet down and they bridge. So against white belts and some blue belts, they can bridge the guy over every time. But then against more sophisticated guys, now they're getting mounted. So like works completely against them, but they've ingrained it in them. So now they have to unlearn it, which can be a pain in the neck. Or like they're in no-gi, they're doing a knee cut pass and they're not getting an underhook. And if somehow it works a little bit against the white belts, but then when they go against higher belts, now they're getting swept and reversed. So we're telling our white belts now, just do the techniques we're presenting in class. Just try it. And the challenge is, it's going to fail the first 20 times you try it live. If you drill something in class 10 and you're like, oh, I understand how this works. Now you're going live. It's not going to work probably. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It may take 20 times against a resisting opponent. And finally, you're going to have some success. But like you have to be realistic and your expectations have to say, oh, like let's say I'm in your closed guard. I'm going to stand up to break your guard. The first 20 times you knock me on my butt and I get swept. I have to go through that till finally I can stand up and you can't knock me over now. And now I can break your guard and start to pass.
So for that example, you're saying keep standing up.
Yep.
Try to see what went wrong. Ask instructor why you keep getting knocked over. Try to fix it. And instead of saying I'm not standing up.
Right. Anymore. And like if you learn something in class, like here's how you pass half guard, and you get to half guard, try to do what you just learned. And expect it not to work, but that's the process that's going to get it to work. It's never going to work for you unless you try it multiple times and fail in the beginning till you start to succeed. So don't improvise that much, which is like, it's hard for people to do because that's the fun thing about jiu-jitsu. Like, oh, we can all do it our own way. I can do it the way my personality sees things, the way my body works. I can play to my strengths, all that baloney. But I think it's going to hurt your development.
Especially at first. That'll come, right? Everyone will eventually be improvising.
Yeah, once you get to be purple belt, start inventing all your techniques.
It's not, you have to keep reminding yourself. I remember sometimes myself being on the mat going, okay, what am I supposed to do here? Like what am I, like instead of, especially if you're going to someone brand new and you're like, I can probably roll him here. Like, say I'm on the bottom of a mountain. It's like, he's kind of like, probably grab his arm and roll him.
Yeah. He's off balance. He's a beginner. He doesn't know what he's doing, but
I want to practice something else. And that goes back to what you're saying about the ego. So maybe you won't escape because you're trying something, but so what?
So what? Yeah.
Eventually that'll help you.
Eventually you're going to develop way more than you would otherwise. All right, man. So that's it. Let's call it a wrap. Awesome, guys.
It's good.
So subscribe, like, and share. Thanks so much.